Okay, so we're going over the changes to Toxic Rain Overlap. The first thing we're going to go over is spread. Now, when it comes to 5 arrows, there's always usually 2 or 3 that will spawn extremely close to you, and the remaining 2 will either be both on the outside or 1 in the middle and 1 on the outside. There will always be 1 at nearly your maximum reach. But from my testing, about 95% of the time, all 5 pods will be hitting you. Now, it is possible for the 5th final pod to actually miss you, but it's pretty rare to actually happen. I sat here just right-clicking for a very long time, and very, very rarely would I actually notice one actually missing me. So in its current state after the changes, I would be pretty happy to say that 5 pods is, a very reasonable thing to put on your POB. So where does AoE fit into all this? Well, before the changes, AoE would only affect the explosion portion and how far your vines would travel. Your vines deal your damage over time portion of your skill, which is essentially your main damage. So the more consistently you could add vines to the build, or more arrows to the build, the more damage you could deal overall. However, this ended up being rather overpowered, and GGG put the nerf hammer on this. So what did they change? Well, essentially all they did was make it so that AoE would also affect how far your pods would spread away from the player. Now, this doesn't actually change how the spread works, right? You'll still have ones that spawn close to you, you'll still have one on the very outside all the time, but they will actually get further and further away from the player to compensate. From what we can gather, this is at a 1-to-1 ratio, so if I add a radius to my area of effect, it actually pushes the pod out 1 radius also. Essentially what this means for you, the player, is that no matter how much AoE you add, or how much you take, you're always going to end up with 5 arrows worth of overlap. So is there a point to having AoE on the build at all anymore? Well, technically yes. The more AoE you have, the more of the entire screen you're hitting at once. This is going to help a lot when you're clearing up packs on the screen, or whenever you're just bossing, because even though it's only a minor amount of damage, if you have a super small amount of AoE and the boss moves 1 step, well, now he's at a range of all 5 of your pods. If you have rather large pods, he moves away, he's only going to be hit by 3 instead of, 0. So obviously this just helps with consistency on boss damage. So my advice to people would essentially be, treat area of effect as a quality of life. If you can get it for free at no extra cost and it just happens to be there, take it. But it is a luxury. It is not something that everyone should go out of their way for anymore. So what does this mean for additional arrows? Whenever you add an additional arrow to the build, you actually increase the radius of the pod spread by about 5. Now back in the day, we used to just get AoE to make up for this. But whenever you add 5 AoE now, you also push the pods out at the exact same time. So you're constantly chasing your tail. So what in effect happens here is that whenever you add an arrow to the build, you're making your damage worse. Or more specifically, your single target. Now, we tested this in the Phoenix map, which actually has a massive bias towards additional arrows, and it still ended up netting us a DPS loss. So we went from about 10 to 11 seconds per kill with 5 arrows, to about 13, 14 when we had 6 arrows. Now, that's not the biggest loss in the world, but what I would prefer people actually do from now on is pretty much just get more damage on those 5 pods because they're consistent, and not worry about additional arrow because it's not helping you out. If you want more clear speed, just get more AoE, rather than get an additional arrow which you can't compensate for. Alright, so that's pretty much everything you guys should need to know about additional arrows, AoE, and pod spread from now on. So I suppose the next big change for the build is coming in the form of defenses. Now, we got this from Remycaster, a link to his channel down below, and I would definitely recommend you guys go check out his form guides, man. Remy is legitimately probably the greatest form guide writer for PoE we have right now. So go and check him out, guys. Now, we've already shown this on stream before, so I'm sure a lot of you guys already know the defensive flare I'm talking about. But for anyone that hasn't, I'm going to tell you guys right now, this defensive flare is so strong that I am actually expecting it to be nerfed by the end of the league if we popularize it. And that defensive flare I'm talking about is, of course, Veteran's Awareness. Veteran's Awareness grants you plus 10 to all elemental resistances and plus 10 to all maximum elemental resistances while affected by a non-Val Guard skill. And grants an additional 20% physical damage reduction while affected by a non-Val Guard skill also. Now, it also has a drawback of 20% more damage taken if a non-Val Guard skill buff was lost recently. So while this thing is up, you have 85 all res and 20% physical damage reduction, which is massive for any build. And when it's down, you're taking 20% more damage, which actually can be counteracted pretty easily just by a Wind Dancer alone, which you already have on the build. But what I'd like people to focus on with this defensive flare is how it pairs into our playstyle. We are predominantly ranged and dodge based, so most of the time we aren't taking damage anyway, so the problem comes in when we finally do take a hit. Now, even if I was doing absolutely nothing right, we have Wind Dancer and we have Kintsugi, which is a 40% damage reduction. We also have Divine Flesh and Nature's Boon on top of this. So with a 5.5k life pool, we can soak up to about 10k damage pretty easily. So when you get hit, your Wind Dancer and your Kintsugi are down, and then all of a sudden you're vulnerable to damage. Which would normally be the case. Except for, now Immortal Call is procced, and you've got Veteran's Awareness on top of that. Immortal Call on its own is 28% less elemental and physical damage taken at level 7. When Veteran's Awareness kicks in, the physical damage reduction ends up going up to 48%. And then when you add in your Basalt Flask and Flask effect, you end up getting an additional 21% on top of that, leaving you at a whopping 69% physical damage reduction. And you're at 85 maximum all elemental resistances, with 28% less elemental damage taken thanks to the Immortal Call, 6% reduced elemental damage taken thanks to Nature's Boon, and 50% of elemental damage taken is chaos damage thanks to Divine Flesh. So while this is up, we're practically immune to all elemental damage, and physical damage isn't doing a great deal. So in summary, you're a dodge-based character that very rarely gets hit, and you're able to utilize range as much as you want. In the event you do get hit, you soak up 40% of the damage taken, and most likely aren't going to die to a one hit. Then your Immortal Call and Veteran's Awareness will proc, making you extremely tanky. So you're probably wondering about the downside to this. Well, because of all the skill effect duration we scale, there actually isn't one. Our Immortal Call can last over 4 seconds, which means that during our 1.8 second cooldown timer for the Immortal Call to come back up, our Wind Dancer and Kintsugi are up. So we're constantly ping-ponging between these two massive defensive layers, and that's assuming that we're taking constant damage. Now I'll remind you, we are playing a ranged, dodge-based character. We shouldn't even be taking hits that frequently in the first place, but in the event that we do take a hit, we're actually probably one of the tankiest characters in the game right now. More tanky than most melee characters, which is actually kind of funny. Anyway guys, I just wanted to give you an update on the build and what we're planning on doing with it. The POBs have already been updated to reflect these changes, so you can go grab them on the link down below. In its current state, by going Raider, we actually have a stronger League starter than we did before, and the gear works exactly the same. And thanks to our changes to the late game, we actually have better defenses than we did before as well. So hopefully that put your mind at ease, guys. I hope you guys like the changes we made. If you did, like, subscribe, all that jazz. I will catch you guys later.